So, as I stated in my intro, my disability is deafness. So, what is the proper definition of deafness? Remember, we want to use first-person language when referring to people who have disabilities. So, the proper way to refer to them is to say, person who is deaf. Incorrect ways to say it would be deaf person, or to say they are hard of hearing, which is not as acceptable as it used to be. So, the textbook definition is an inability to comprehend verbal language due to an inability to hear. In IDEA, it says a hearing impairment that is so severe that the child is impaired in processing linguistic information through hearing with or without amplification. And the amplification would be the hearing aids. So some facts and statistics, you can read some of them on your screen. The big one for me is 15% of children between the ages of 6 and 19 have a measurable hearing loss in at least one ear. So that means we will definitely be dealing with it throughout our careers as teachers. Speech reading is the more current word for lip reading. A mild hearing loss can cause a child to miss as much as 50% of the classroom discussion. So we definitely have to make sure we make accommodations for them to learn. Listening to MP3 players at high volumes over time can cause permanent damage to hearing. So we definitely want to make sure we're turning the volume down when we're listening to our headsets. With early identification and appropriate services, deaf children can develop communication at the same rate as their hearing peers. So as long as us as teachers are doing our jobs and making sure that we know everything that we need to know about people who are deaf, they can progress through the grades as fast as their peers. Approximately 3 million children in the U.S. have hearing loss. 1.3 million of them are under the age of 3. So obviously this is a very widespread disability. And also, just because students are deaf doesn't necessarily mean they're visual learners. There are many different kinds of learners, and we have to make sure that we can quickly find out what type of learner they are in order to help them learn as best as they can. So now that we know some facts and statistics, let's look at some different characteristics that a person who is deaf has. Difficulty with oral expression. They'll often have a degree of language delay. Will usually exhibit some form of articulation difficulty. Can become easily frustrated if their needs are not met, which may lead to some behavioral difficulties. So if we're being teachers, we have to be aware of that. And sometimes the use of hearing aids leads to embarrassment and fear of rejection from peers. And later in my video presentation, I'll show you how a little girl came up with a device that helps with that. So as you see on your screen too, difficulty following verbal directions. Some of them can't lip read, often follows and rarely leads. It's kind of hard for them to lead if a lot of their peers don't know sign language. Alright, so here's your first assignment. Go to the website provided on the slide. If you don't want to type in the whole thing, Google what hearing loss sounds like. There are a few different ones on there, so make sure you're on the same website as the one on the slide. I think it's like the third one down, at least when I Googled it. So you're going to follow the directions to turn your volume to the correct level. Click on each of the 4 different levels of hearing, which would be normal, first indications of hearing loss, mild hearing loss, and moderate hearing loss. I want you in the discussion post to rate 1 to 10 how easy it is for you to hear, 10 being it's really easy, 1 being it's near impossible. And then say which level you were first unable to make out what the person was saying. You just couldn't hear them at all. You didn't have any idea what they were saying. Alright, so since we're going to eventually be working with people or children who are deaf, we need to know how to treat each of the different levels of deafness, because there's more than, it's not just everyone's deaf or they're not deaf, there's different levels. So somebody who is mildly deaf, a student with a mild loss, they would hear speech but at a lower level. So hearing aids are often not helpful as background noise is louder and distortion is introduced. Then we have moderate, or partial hearing loss. This is where a student is with a considerable degree of useful hearing, but when aided, it may not be apparent that the student has a hearing loss, especially if their speech is fluent. A student may need to lip read if they have partial hearing loss. Then we go to severe hearing loss. This is a little bit less than profound, but not by much. The difference between severe and profound is that severe is the same thing, but has a little bit more residual hearing and speech. So profound, which is one of the worst cases of hearing losses. This is where a student has very little residual hearing or speech and would almost always need to use sign language to communicate. So what can we do to help? We're all going to be dealing with students who are deaf or people who are deaf in our careers. So what can we do to help? Just things to make them more comfortable. Remember that devices do not return the child's hearing to normal. A noisy environment will cause grief to the child with a hearing device and noise around the child, so we should keep the noise to a minimum. Also check the device to make sure it's working. So we're going to need to kind of figure out how it works and learn how it works so we can help them if it's not working. Just shut classroom doors or windows to help eliminate noise. Establish predictable routines for this child. Keep them in a close proximity. It's easier on the student if they're closer to a teacher. Provide small group work when possible. That way it's easier for them to communicate one-on-one or one-on-three or whatever it is. And then make assessment accommodations to enable a clear picture of demonstrated academic growth. So you want to make sure that you're assessing them in the correct ways. So you can increase early reading skills in children by using shared book methods. So kind of like I said, in small groups, if the student who is deaf is reading along with classmates, with you facilitating, they can more easily learn to read and progress through the levels faster. If you're a teacher who is working with a person who is deaf, you should develop an understanding of students. It's very important to make sure that we understand students who are deaf. So to make sure that they are getting the correct teaching they need and are able to progress through the grades as fast as they're able to, and hopefully as fast as their peers. So there's some really cool technology for people who are deaf that they've come up with. Motion Savvy UNI. It translates American Sign Language into speech, and that speech into text. So it utilizes a special camera to track and locate both hands and all 10 fingers. Graphic representations of hands provide live feedback to make sure gestures are being captured correctly. So that's a very cool little tool that they've come up with. Solar Ear, a solar-powered hearing aid battery that costs a fraction of what traditional batteries cost, because they can be expensive. So this one lasts for 2 to 3 years when regular ones can only last for a week. So that can cut costs for people who can't afford it. I See What You Say. This captures spoken language on the smartphone, converts it into text, and sends text via Bluetooth to a remote user's device. So that's kind of like Motion Savvy as well. Haley's Cherished Charms, and this is what I was talking about earlier. At 10 years old, a girl named Haley noticed that many of her friends and classmates at a school for the deaf, were hard of hearing, which is not acceptable anymore, hid their hearing aids behind their ear. Haley said, "I wanted to make sure my hearing aid shines and is fancy and proud of my hearing aids." So she started designing jewelry that can be best described as hearing aid bling. Haley Cherished Charms are available in a variety of different colors, and also it's available with some cochlear implants as well, so not just hearing aids. Alright, so here is your second assignment. Let's see. So I want you to complete this quiz. It's 10 questions. I guess you could Google Deaf Quiz, and you could probably find it on the first page as well, so you don't have to type in that really long website into your web browser. Alright, there we go. When you're finished, just record your final score to the discussion post. And that way, I mean, just whatever out of 10 you got. So, I hope you all learned as much as I did from my video, as I did from researching for it, because I really did learn a lot about people who are deaf while doing this video. I hope we can all use this information in our future careers.